there are no more criminals. They were criminals.
Cambodia's Prince Norodom Sihanouk. In 1970, at the height of the Vietnam War, he was unwilling to help the United States fight the Vietnamese. So the United States was not at all unhappy when he was overthrown. Today, Sihanouk is the leader of a military coalition fighting against the present Cambodian government, which was installed by the Vietnamese after they defeated the Khmer Rouge. Today, Sihanouk is intensely anti-Vietnamese. So now the United States is only too happy to be his benefactor. It is simpler than it sounds. Sihanouk is America's main man in this war for control of Cambodia. And Sihanouk's most powerful partners are the murderous Khmer Rouge.
I try to control them, and I give them orders not to commit crimes. I repeat, they are no more criminals. They are patriots.
Well, that's a definition of patriotism that I can't imagine. The Khmer Rouge are the most genocidal people on the face of the earth. These people are maniacs. These people will come to power under any guise.
In your opinion, Congressman, why does the United States, the Bush administration, have anything to do whatsoever with the Khmer Rouge?
It's a policy of hatred. Our policy is a policy that's really captured in time in the 1970s. We're still fighting the Vietnam War, and this is the last battle of that war, and if we have to use the Khmer Rouge as a pawn in that, we'll use them, and we don't appreciate that we're being used by the Khmer Rouge rather than the other way around.
We will never forget the horrible crimes of the genocide. We'll never allow that nightmare to our recur.
In Cambodia, do people actively think that the Khmer Rouge might return?
They do. They really do. It's a real fear of and a real feeling that it's very possible that they could come back.
With each passing day, the likelihood of the Khmer Rouge coming to power in Cambodia is greater and greater.
You really believe that?
And I really believe that.
It is true that the most efficient forces on the battlefield in the process of fighting the enemy, they are Khmer Rouge.
The most efficient fighting force
The most efficient fighting forces.
The other forces in the coalition led by Prince Sihanouk are known as the non-communist resistance, easily recognizable by their American uniforms. They have not done as well on the battlefield as their Khmer Rouge allies. They get much of their aid from the United States, most of it secretly.
This is what you might call a Contra operation, much like the support of the Contras in Honduras, or like the operation to support the Afghan rebels in Afghanistan.
I did not ask for the support of the United States of America, but it happened that she spontaneously, President Reagan in particular, and his administration, and after him, President George Bush and his administration, they gave me their friendship and some form of aid, so I could not say no.
So the United States is deeply involved in Cambodia again. Cambodia is on the edge of hell again. To understand how this could be, it is essential to recall America's adventure in Vietnam. By 1969, the North Vietnamese were using the eastern part of Cambodia, along the Vietnamese border, both as a route through which they infiltrated troops to South Vietnam and as a sanctuary for troops and ammunition. Cambodia was technically neutral, which meant little to the North Vietnamese or the United States. The Nixon administration was secretly bombing Cambodia, but when that failed to uproot the Vietnamese, the United States invaded.
Cambodia is the Nixon doctrine in its purest form.
Many Americans will recall the uproar. It was the invasion of Cambodia which students were demonstrating against that fateful day in May at Kent State. Congress told President Nixon that the troops in Cambodia must be removed by July of 1970. But the secret bombing of Cambodia would continue until 1973. 500,000 tons of bombs were dropped. The Vietnamese were never dislodged from Cambodia, but the U.S. campaign against Cambodia was a major factor in recruiting thousands of Cambodians to the cause of the Cambodian communists, the Khmer Rouge, and their leader, Pol Pot. The man who told Cambodians over and over again that they should join the Khmer Rouge was Prince Sihanouk.
Samdech Sihanouk affectionately embraces the courageous fighters and heroes who have just come from the front.
In 1975, when the U.S. decided to retreat from Indochina, its client government in Cambodia could not withstand the pressure applied by the Khmer Rouge. Within days, the Khmer Rouge were in the capital. For millions of Cambodians, a nightmare they could never imagine was about to begin. The United States says there's a plan to save Cambodia and keep the Khmer Rouge out of power. A plan for the Cambodian people to decide their own future in elections supervised by the United Nations. The Bush administration has said that it is unequivocally opposed to the return of the Khmer Rouge, even though the plan, which the U.S. supports, would automatically hand the Khmer Rouge an equal share of political power in Cambodia, even before those elections are held. Last month, about the time we were in Cambodia, the official Khmer Rouge radio said, "The position of the U.S. on a political settlement for the war in Cambodia is very correct." So the United States says it's against the Khmer Rouge, but the Khmer Rouge says the United States is doing the right thing. As the King of Siam once observed, it's a puzzlement. The pieces of this puzzle begin to fit together inside western Cambodia, along the border with Thailand. From here, in what they call the liberated zone, the Khmer Rouge and the non-communists are pushing their way towards the Cambodian heartland.
How long has he been fighting?
10 years.
The Bush administration says there is no cooperation here between America's non-communist clients and the Khmer Rouge.
We have made very clear to Prince Sihanouk, to the other non-communists, that we want no cooperation and that our support for them stays with them.
Richard Solomon is the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs.
They are all part of the same ball of wax.
He was assigned to talk to us about Cambodia policy.
This question of cooperation between the non-communist resistance and the Khmer Rouge. You say it doesn't exist. Am I correct?
We see no pattern of cooperation among these people that gets to the problem that we're all worried about, which is the Khmer Rouge making a military comeback. We have repeatedly indicated to Prince Sihanouk and others that anything that looks like that cooperation is absolutely a no-no, unacceptable to us.
But basically the Khmer Rouge does most of the fighting, and afterwards they give some credit for this fighting to the non-communist components in order to make it respectable from an international point of view.
10 years ago, Bertil Lintner, who is Swedish, was working on this border with Cambodian refugees as a badly broken Khmer Rouge were on the run from the Vietnamese army. Today, he's a journalist for the Far Eastern Economic Review, reporting on the comeback of the Khmer Rouge.
The driving force here has always been the Khmer Rouge. So there was always military coordination.
Do you have coordination operation?
No. We plan by our own self. We don't have any cooperation. We don't have any coordination.
When America retreated from Indochina in 1975, so did General Sak Sutsakan, now an American citizen. He is the senior military commander of the non-communist forces inside the liberated zone. He says the non-communists, not the Khmer Rouge, are leading the charge.
The Khmer Rouge come in after, but we don't allow them to do anything.
General Sak and many of his soldiers say they despise the Khmer Rouge, so any cooperation between them is a shock because of what the Khmer Rouge did when they were in charge. Every village and town had its killing field. Tamapuk had its killing field. Tamapuk is 15 miles inside Cambodia from the Thai border in the so-called liberated zone. Last December, according to General Sak, the non-communist forces defeated Cambodian government troops here. Afterwards, they organized this rally, complete with banners in English. But after the battle, what were the Khmer Rouge doing here?
According to people in the village, there were Khmer Rouge soldiers in Tamapuk, about 70 of them.
Yes, I don't count the Khmer Rouge, but I saw by my eyes, and I received a report from the field commander. When we are fighting at Tamapuk, only we fight together under our command. But we are surprised. We are surprised following after we occupy that area, so many Khmer Rouge. We knew about the Khmer Rouge, stay on that area. But to participate on this fighting, not yet. But they come after.
Are people in Congress aware that the Khmer Rouge and the non-communist coalition operate together in the field?
I think, again, people are aware that the walls between the non-communist resistance and the Khmer Rouge are coming down.
This is what he's referring to. The soldier on the left is the non-communist. Those on the right, in the plain green, are Khmer Rouge.
On the battlefield, they are forced, naturally, to go on fighting the enemy side by side. That does not mean that they are mixed, that they are together.
And if they were fighting together, side by side, you would find that, in your words, unacceptable?
Absolutely, and we have indicated so very clearly to Sihanouk and the other non-communists.
What would we do about it?
The law, if there was a judgment made that this violated the law, then we would have to cut off arms.
To the non-communist resistance?
Correct. We are not supplying, support. We do not supply lethal support, but we would have to cut off our support to the non-communists.
In fact, you did say we would have to cut off arms to the non-communist resistance.
I made a mistake there. We do not supply any lethal assistance to the non-communists.
Sometimes the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency of the USA, gave weapons to the non-communist forces. Perhaps, your government and the CIA are not cooperating with each other.
According to sources on all sides of the conflict who know the United States does supply weapons and ammunition to the non-communists. Our sources include current as well as former members of the U.S. government. The weapons arrive here in Cambodia via America's allies, Singapore and Thailand. You can see them everywhere in the war zone. The non-communists also get weapons from the Chinese and, on the battlefield, even from their partners, the Khmer Rouge.
From time to time, on the battlefield, when the Khmer Rouge saw that we had no more ammunition to go on fighting the enemy, spontaneously they gave us ammunition, and sometimes they gave heavy weapons.
So while the Bush administration may say there is a clear demarcation between the non-communists and the Khmer Rouge, it just isn't so in the war zone.
Khmer Rouge have always used Sihanouk as their cover, as their respectability. He's a puppet of the Khmer Rouge. He's controlled by them. Indeed, the Khmer Rouge have enormous influence now throughout the Sihanouk organization.
It is said that even in this house, the Khmer Rouge have representatives who watch over you all the time and who really, in essence, don't let you operate freely and independently. True? Wrong?
No, it is very wrong. Very untrue. Very untrue. There is just one Khmer Rouge with me. And never I allow him to say anything, to dictate anything to me.
We relied on Prince Sihanouk in taming the Khmer Rouge. In fact, the emperor has no clothes. In fact, in supporting such a coalition, the United States is supporting the Khmer Rouge. The United States is working for the return of the Khmer Rouge to Cambodia.
In the Cambodian countryside, a wedding. When the Khmer Rouge were in power, the Khmer Rouge decided who you could marry. If a bride and groom defied them, the bride and groom could be executed. Cambodia is trying to heal itself. There was so much to recover from. Under the Khmer Rouge, religion was abolished and many monks were killed. There were no markets. The Khmer Rouge abolished money. Of the 20,000 teachers in the 1970s, 2/3 were gone.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Anyone caught speaking English was sentenced to death.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to What's My Job.
Welcome to What's My Job.
Do you get a big salary?
Do you get a big salary?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
In Phnom Penh, they call this English Street. Every evening, thousands of Cambodians struggle to learn English. When you learn to speak English really well, what are you going to do? You're going to become a teacher? Or a businessman? Or a journalist?
I want to make a journalist.
You want to be a journalist?
Yeah.
Oh, my sympathies. In Cambodia, he'd be a war correspondent, and the war is real. Only 30 miles from the capital, in a Red Cross hospital, you can see evidence of the increased Khmer Rouge attacks. The victims are civilians. How old are you?
You, man? I'm 15 years old.
And what happened to you?
I was shot. I know that they are the Khmer Rouge.
Everyone in Cambodia knows what the Khmer Rouge are capable of. However bad they think their Vietnamese-installed government is, the unifying force is fear of a Khmer Rouge comeback. The Cambodian government had believed, perhaps naively, that when the Vietnamese withdrew, their isolation would end.
Let's face it, the Vietnamese essentially have withdrawn. That was the standard we set about a year ago, which said that if they would withdraw from Cambodia, we would consider normalization with them. Well, they've withdrawn.
10 years after arriving in Cambodia, the Vietnamese army withdrew last September. From everybody's point of view, the Vietnamese had stayed too long. They had driven out the Khmer Rouge. However, they left in place a communist government in their own image, which Cambodia's harshest critics continue to find unacceptable. Even though there has been social and political reform, though there are many non-communists in government now, Amnesty International has criticized the government for mistreating its political opponents. The man the Vietnamese left in charge is Hun Sen. In the 1970s, he was an officer in the Khmer Rouge who defected to the Vietnamese. They installed him as Prime Minister of Cambodia after they invaded.
The United States government says that you are an unacceptable figurehead, that you are a puppet of the Vietnamese.
សម្រាប់ខ្លួនខ្ញុំពិបាកដែរ
For me, it is a very difficult position because at the same time, I have been accused of being a Khmer Rouge propagandist, of being a puppet of Vietnam. I don't understand it.
They are anti-Khmer Rouge. There are a number of them who were in the Khmer Rouge, who fled from the Khmer Rouge, either out of fear or revulsion, and it doesn't matter very much which.
Prime Minister, you knew the Khmer Rouge in the 1970s. Have they changed?
So far, I see no changes in these groups. They only want to show the change in appearance for the diplomatic consumption.
Are you afraid of the Khmer Rouge?
Well, for us, the fighting against the return of the Khmer Rouge is a must. Whether we are afraid or not afraid of them, we have to fight against them.
Hun Sen has the tanks which the Vietnamese left him, but he does not have much of an army. And he has been widely criticized for drafting 15 and even 14-year-olds. There is very little appetite among them for fighting the Khmer Rouge.
Do you have the same defense perimeter in the west?
The defense minister took us to the front on the edge of the second largest city, Battambang. He said the perimeter was secure, that this small arms fire we heard was nothing. That night after we left, the Khmer Rouge shelled the town. The defense minister knows that his troops alone, without the Vietnamese, have a real problem fighting forces supported by two superpowers, the United States and China. Militarily, the Chinese keep the Khmer Rouge in business, and the relationship between China and the U.S. has been central to America's Cambodia policy for 3 American presidents. Mr. Carter, Mr. Reagan, and Mr. Bush have all gone along with the Chinese aim of trying to weaken, even humiliate Vietnam, using the Khmer Rouge as their sword. In 1978, President Carter called the Khmer Rouge the worst violators of human rights in the world. But his national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, said the Chinese should be encouraged to rebuild the Khmer Rouge as a way to keep the pressure on Vietnam. Brzezinski prevailed. During the Reagan years, and now in the Bush administration, the U.S. has made sure that the United Nations seat reserved for Cambodia has been held first by the Khmer Rouge alone, and more recently by the coalition led by Prince Sihanouk, there on the left, but still dominated by the Khmer Rouge. There on the right is Pol Pot's representative.
What difference do you think it makes that the U.S. government will not have a relationship with Cambodia?
They've led this international aid boycott and a recognition in the UN of the Khmer Rouge-dominated coalition government, and the international community has found it difficult to go against that leadership. The isolation and the lack of access to aid is quite evident on the ground.
Jonathan and Ruth Clements are American Mennonites sent here to help by the Mennonite Central Committee, the MCC. At one point, thanks to the Khmer Rouge violence of the 70s, there were reportedly only 45 Cambodian doctors here for 7 million people.
We won't allow humanitarian supplies, and haven't for the last decade, to go in and help children who are starving, to help people who are in desperate need of medical assistance. We block the UN from doing things that would help children and elderly people who have nothing to do with this war, but who are simply the victims of it, at the same time that we won't isolate in a similar fashion the Khmer Rouge.
It's illegal to spend American money in Cambodia, and so we have to apply for a special license to do that. MCC was refused a license for educational supplies until we wrote a lot of letters and tried to change that, and they finally did agree to give us a license.
Refused a license for what educational supplies?
It was for pencils and paper and little school kits, just very simple things, very non-lethal.
Providing school books isn't going to get you very far, very long.
Does it ever embarrass you as a senior American official that non-governmental organizations, Americans, are not allowed to get school books in the country to educate Cambodian children?
Look, the issue, again, as a senior American official, is how can we create a process here which will end the civil war in Cambodia. That, in my view, is the highest kind of calling.
What role do you think the United States is playing regarding Cambodia?
Frankly, an obstructionist one.
Lyndall McLean represents all of Australia's relief organizations in Cambodia. She is also her government's eyes and ears here.
From your point of view, why do you think the rest of the world is dragging its feet on Cambodia?
Essentially, I think it's because this side has been so isolated. It doesn't have a propaganda machine. It doesn't sell itself well. In the early years of this government, there were a lot of problems. There were restrictions on people. But that has changed so dramatically, especially since the Vietnamese have left the country. And the American government refuses to even consider looking at those changes and what is taking place.
We've now been through the Reagan administration. We're now in the Bush administration, and we still recognize Khmer Rouge at the United Nations.
Again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get a UN peace process here so that the Cambodian people can themselves choose a government that they support.
There are among U.S. officials, diplomats, there are few Americans who appreciate the efficiency of the Khmer Rouge army on the battlefield.
Who are those people?
No, I don't want to create a crisis among us, but...
Senior American officials?
I apologize because, you know, no, I don't lack courage, but please don't oblige me to be involved in your affairs. I don't want to go further.
But you clearly imply that there are senior American officials who believe in what the Khmer Rouge is doing on the battlefield?
I accuse nobody. Please don't force me to speak about Americans.
I have never heard you so reluctant to talk about America, almost, forgive me sir, almost shy to talk about America.
I had enough disputes with America in the past. I don't want to have more difficulties.
Are you afraid of losing American support?
I repeat that I don't interfere in your affairs, and I'm asking for nothing from you. You are a sovereign state, a great nation. It is up to you to decide to go to this or that direction. I have no comment.
All along the border between Thailand and Cambodia, on the Thailand side, there are refugee camps for Cambodians who a decade ago fled the fighting between the Khmer Rouge and the Vietnamese. Even though the United States will not give a penny for assistance inside Cambodia, the U.S. is the largest donor of aid in these refugee camps. In half a dozen such camps, U.S. aid is distributed through the United Nations, but the camps are controlled by the various Cambodian military factions, which means U.S. aid is going to the military organizations, including the Khmer Rouge. Here at Site 2, controlled by the non-communists, the 150,000 people are virtually prisoners. As in all the camps, the refugees are part of the war effort, whether they like it or not.
Because we're so close to the battlefront, because there's so many armed men within a stone's throw of Site 2 itself, weapons can travel back and forth.
Andy Pendleton is a senior field officer with UNBRO, the United Nations Border Relief Operation.
Weapons are buried outside of the camp, and there's an illegal sale of arms. And someone that wants to put his hands on a hand grenade can do so for less than 50 cents.
These people have been kept at the border for 10 years in these conditions. When they came out, they were escaping the terrors of the Khmer Rouge. They were totally devastated. People were dying by the hundreds, and they've slowly come back to health. So if you go in the camps now, you may even say, oh, it looks quite nice, but it's not nice at all.
Susan Walker is the regional director of Handicap International. They are very busy.
There's probably more landmines strewn along this border than just about anywhere in the world. The Khmer Rouge put down landmines. The Vietnamese had put down landmines. The Phnom Penh government and the non-communist resistance have put down landmines, and nobody knows where each other's landmines are. In the last 3 weeks alone, we've had 4 people, all of them women and children, with one man this week, making the total 5 people that have stepped on the landmines. And what they did was venture out beyond the perimeter in the camp to go out into the forest and look for something to add to their diet, crabs or roots or something like that, and they stepped on landmines. And it's a horrible sight to see someone brought into the camp with their leg dangling, barely hanging on from the knee below.
Farther south along the frontier, Site 8. 35,000 people here. The caps which these young men are wearing make it clear this camp is controlled by the Khmer Rouge.
There's a head of camp that is Khmer Rouge. The camp is divided into 13 sections. There is a Khmer Rouge appointed section leader. The sections are divided into streets. Each street has its own leader, and within the streets there are Khmer Rouge leaders.
Edwin Pugh has been at Site 8 for almost 2 years. He knows how the Khmer Rouge operate. At night, for example, refugees here are forced to carry food and ammunition over those mountains to the Khmer Rouge fighters inside Cambodia. The U.S. has not threatened to cut off its share of aid to this camp. Washington has not used its influence to remove the refugees from Khmer Rouge control.
Those people are being used as war material, as war stockpiles. The Khmer Rouge has already forced 15,000 people back up out of their camps, many of those people held against their will, to fight.
We're in one of the most malaria-infested areas of the world. The people that live in camp do not experience much malaria. If they're forcibly sent back to across the border, we're talking only a few kilometers, then many of them will get malaria, and will get it severely, and there'll be a lot of deaths.
No one knows how many civilians are captive to the Khmer Rouge. Up and down the border, there are also secret Khmer Rouge military camps, where thousands of other civilians live.
This past summer of '89, there was a polio epidemic. 31 children were brought in from the 3 surrounding military camps, hidden camps that the UN and the voluntary agencies don't go to. And out of those 31 children, they were under the age of 5. 3 children died, and the remaining children had varying degrees of paralysis. And we treated them in the hospital, and many of these children were taken back to the camps at night because the Khmer Rouge did not want them to stay longer in Site 8. And their treatment was not finished, and they were taken back to the military camps. And after pressure was put on by the United Nations and the Red Cross, the Khmer Rouge agreed to have a vaccination campaign for the children in these camps. But they said, you cannot come in our camps, we will bring the children out. And they trucked out 10,000 children under the age of 15.
Anybody who supports the Khmer Rouge, and the United States may say they do not, but by supporting the coalition, you are in part supporting Khmer Rouge. Anybody who supports the Khmer Rouge, in my eyes, is taking a morally indefensible position.
They still run the people under their control with the same draconian hand.
And our government supports the coalition in which they are the strongest partner.
I think wrongly. Yeah. No, I'm very firm on that. I don't get emotional here because I think that in order to try to get the American government to move, you have to convince them that it's in our interest in decency, that we end any relationship whatsoever, even indirect, with the Khmer Rouge. Congress has passed a law to that effect. You'd think we'd be applying it.
You were at the Cambodian peace talks. You sat not far from a leading member of the Khmer Rouge, who I assume you accept is guilty of genocide. Why didn't you try to have him arrested?
The question is, what does that lead to in the way of a settlement of this conflict? You arrest one man, that doesn't solve the problem.
But it does confirm with Public Law 100-502 of the U.S. Congress, which says that we should hold accountable those who are responsible for genocide under international law, and we're negotiating with them.
And the question is, how can you provide a political structure in which the Cambodian people or the international community can bring these people to justice?
Why not arrest Pol Pot?
I'd be delighted to see Pol Pot arrested.
Why don't we make an effort to arrest Pol Pot?
He's not on territory we control.
Are there not new guidelines which says we can go to other countries, even without their permission, and arrest people we deem guilty of international crimes?
I think the way to put it is that one of the things we are trying to build into this political settlement process are both guarantees against the kind of violence that Pol Pot perpetrated, and the creation of a political process, again, where people like Pol Pot could be brought to justice.
Today, Pol Pot lives here on the Thai-Cambodian border under the political protection of the Thai military. Though he has led the Khmer Rouge for almost 30 years, though he is the architect of Cambodia's genocide, there has been no American campaign to arrest him. Do you think the United States should call for an international Nuremberg-like tribunal to judge the Khmer Rouge?
Okay, I support the idea. I support.
Why do you think the United States has not done that?
It is up to you. You are a sovereign country. I have no power.
But as of now, sir, you are regarded as the United States' main man.
I was told that the Americans, they believed that I was mad, not main, but mad.
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 The United States is involved with the Thai military and other Asian allies in a secret effort to coordinate the military campaign of the non-communist forces against the Cambodian government. The covert U.S. aid budget for the non-communist resistance now is estimated at about $20 million. Where does that go?
I can't say what about the covert, you know. We don't know exactly the amount of the covert.
But who coordinates this?
I don't know who's the leader of the coordination.
Well, there is a working group which looks after support to the resistance in Cambodia, and it's more than that. They also target certain areas inside Cambodia and the tell resistance that you can go in here, you blow up that bridge, and you attack that camp and that sort of thing. They basically help them with military planning, with strategy, and as well as supplying arms to the resistance.
How often do you meet with the Cambodian working group?
Oh, you know, normally since 1 month, 2 months. It depends that if we don't have any means on our hand, we have to make appeal to those kind of things to helping us, because we can do, you know, without any weapon and ammunition.
Do you go to the Cambodian working group when you tell them the weapons you want?
We explain what we need.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Victor Thompson.
We tried but failed to interview officials at the American Embassy in Bangkok, so we submitted a list of questions about embassy involvement in the Cambodia working group. That's it there. As I said, they're questions specifically designed for the embassy to answer, and I'd like written replies to them if you won't talk to me on the record.
Not on the record. I'd be happy to talk to you on the background, but in terms of addressing the Cambodian issue, Washington's guidance was to
That
send you
nobody
back
here,
to them.
the ambassador won't answer any questions on the record, and you won't answer any questions on the record at all.
We'll send these back to Washington. Tell them that you're asking the questions of the embassy and
Right.
ask them how we should deal with that.
Okay, nice to see you again.
No promises
I
on the
appreciate it.
answer.
Thanks
Good to
very
see
much.
you.
Take care. Bye-bye. We asked you about the participation of the U.S. Embassy staff in the Cambodian working group, and you said we do not comment on questions involving purported intelligence or covert activities. Why no comment?
I think that's a standard position that relates to all intelligence activities. It doesn't relate to anything specific to Cambodia.
Yeah. Why, in your view, is this working group covert in the first place? Why is it not open?
Well, here I think the question has been answered. We don't get off into details.
But you've no explanation of why the Cambodia working group must be covert?
My guess is the host country doesn't really want to have foreign troops on its borders and would just as soon the problem went away.
Is it also possible that because there is some involvement in the working group with the Khmer Rouge, not just with the non-communist resistance?
Well, again, I can't get off into details, much of which I'm not even aware of, frankly.
This man knows the details. Special Forces Colonel Denny Lane, former military attaché at the Bangkok Embassy. When he was still on active duty in Thailand, he was assigned to the UN border relief operation, where he had good access to the Khmer Rouge. The Pentagon said we couldn't talk to him. He says the U.S. ambassador in Thailand ordered him off the border because we had arrived.
Where does the buck stop?
Well, I think the buck stops in the State Department. The buck stops with the Secretary of State. And ultimately with the President. When the American people know what our policy is and what the results of it are, they won't stand for it.
These people have suffered a tremendous deal from literally being the pawns in the middle of a political situation. And I think this problem needs to be solved with urgency and with fairness, and a lot of attention needs to be given to it now. Actually, yesterday.
So much suffering, such a tortured history. It really isn't so complicated after all. Cambodia in danger of being plunged into darkness again. The United States in danger of being on the wrong side of history.
Peter Jennings reporting.
15 years ago this week, the U.S. officially withdrew from Indochina. But as you can see from this hour, the American experience there is not over. Later this evening, after your local news, I hope you'll join us for a live debate on what America should do there now.